Well, good afternoon, everyone. I have to tell you that this is actually our first live event that we've had for CRPD releasing a report. Typically we do this online or just on the computer, so on our website. So this is exciting for us. So thank you for those who are in attendance today. And thank you for those online. We have a lot of people signed up today. This is being recorded, just so everyone knows. So we will be putting this on our YouTube channel in the coming days if you would like to rewatch it. But again, welcome. My name is Julie Tesh. I'm the president and CEO of the Center for Rural Policy and Development. And it's a day of celebration for us, especially for Kelly. We should have a party streamers and balloons because Kelly's been working on this for 2 years now. It was about 2 years ago that the Office of Higher Education contacted us and said, hey, would you be interested in looking at this data and evaluating it, in these certain areas, which you'll hear about. And we said, absolutely, because we're always seeking out partnerships. And I think this is a really great way that the center can prove that we're a really good partner with other state agencies, being able to do research for them that they might not otherwise be able to do, and having that focus on rural. So I think this is a testament to the teamwork that we've had with OHE. So we're very excited about this. Like I said, it's been 2 years of a lot of hard work. Kelly has spent much time in the South Carolina area on vacation reading statistics books, because that's what you do when you're on vacation, right? But he thinks it's fun, so that's great. So without further ado, we're going to keep on moving today. What we're going to be doing is we have a couple people that we'll introduce to do some welcomes. We'll have Kelly, and then we have a couple other people at the end as well, and we'll save questions until the end. So for those of you online, if you do have questions, just type them in online in the chat box, and then we'll get to those at the very end. And with that, I'm going to introduce Dr. Arthur Brown, who is the provost in West here in Wilmington.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Arthur Brown. I'm provost here at Minnesota West, and it's our pleasure to host this event. We're excited to have you here today, Kelly. We got a chance to listen a little bit to your presentation last week in Granite Falls at the Southwest Workforce Summit. Yeah. And some exciting data. We have Minnesota West has 5 campuses and 2 centers across the Southwest Minnesota. We're actively engaged in strategic planning right now. So a lot of the information that was shared last week, a lot of the information that's going to be shared today by Kelly is going to be important in helping us and guiding this institution and how we respond to the workforce needs and of this area. So anyway, make yourself at home. Everyone, VIPs today on Minnesota West gives you full access to everything. So it's great to have you on campus.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Dr. Brown. It's great being here at one of the many wonderful community and technical colleges that we have here in Minnesota. Also, for those of you in person, there are some refreshments over there. Help yourself. If you would like coffee, my understanding is you go to the president's office, or no, the bookstore. Go to the bookstore and just tell them you're with us and you get coffee. So too bad for you online, but if you want coffee, if you like, otherwise there are refreshments over here. To give us a background of this issue, I'm going to have Nora Morris from the Office of Higher Education. She is the SLEDS director, and she's going to give us a background of this issue and why this is so important.
Thanks, Julie, and good afternoon to all who are present and also all online. As Julie had mentioned, I'm the director of the SLEDS system, which is the State Longitudinal Education Data System. And we were created and are funded by the legislature to study transitions. So we look at transitions from high school through post-secondary and into the workforce. And really the goal is to improve the lives of Minnesotans, as are all state agencies. But our goal is to understand better how to help students achieve their goals and therefore help communities that we are thrilled to have the Center for Policy Research do this work with us. As Julie said, we have a lot of data. It's a fabulous public resource, but there's a limit to our expertise and to our capacity to do this research. So for us to be able to partner with researchers out in the field is a real advantage for us. There are a lot of SLED systems around in the United States. Almost every state has one. We are one of the few that works closely with an outside research community. There's quite a few that don't allow any outside access. So we are really happy with the results that we've had. We look forward to doing more with the Center for Policy Research and other outside researchers. So with no more ado, let's hear what Kelly has to say.
All right, everyone. It's a little different. Like I said, we are doing this live in person, so bear with me as I share my screen. And for those of you online, if you're having any issues at all hearing or seeing the presentation, just put it in the chat. One of my colleagues, Marnie Werner, is actually keeping an eye on that and can really help us when needed. Okay, let's get started. I have a lot of information, a lot of slides, and a lot of charts to show. I'm going to try not to just completely melt everybody's brains with just a whole bunch of data. So we're going to try and make this as at least somewhat entertaining as possible, as much as we can, right? So what we really need to start with first is job vacancies, right? So this particular issue related to where our students in Southwest Minnesota are ending up to work is becoming more and more important and becoming a larger conversation, largely due to the significant change that we've seen in the labor force, which is we have more jobs than people. For the first time in modern history that we've had something like this occur. In 2021 for the state of Minnesota, so this just isn't a Southwest issue, the state of Minnesota had 0.4 job seekers per job vacancies in 2021. So we didn't even have a whole person. I put together here, this is the number of job vacancies. This chart it would be my left, your right. You can see this blue line, that is just the number of job vacancies, the average in the second quarter and the fourth quarter of each year. And as you can see, as we went through the Great Recession, we had a little bit of a dip, but it's been increasing steadily ever since until we're about 15,000 job vacancies on average. This is 2021 data. 2022 is no different. It's probably even more severe in terms of job vacancies. This is an absorbent amount of job vacancies to have in our region. This is the job vacancy rate. So all these lines here are planning regions. Southwest again is this light blue, and a job vacancy rate is the number of vacancies as a percentage of the total filled jobs in a region. The higher the rate, the harder it is to be able to fill those jobs. We consider a rate between 3 and 5% to be relatively healthy. That means you have enough vacancies that there's opportunities for people, while at the same time, there's enough people in the workforce that you have an applicant pool as an employer. And as you can see, as of 2021, we have job vacancy rates that are near 10%. It's 8.6% here in Southwest, the highest being in Northeast at 9.4%. I'm going to tell you right now, an 8 to 10% job vacancy rate is unlike anything we have ever seen in modern history or modern economic times. And a lot of narrative is always focused, particularly on rural areas, that these are low-paying, low-skilled jobs. I'm using air quotes here because I don't think any job is low-skill. But there's this kind of perception. And when you break down the job vacancy survey that Deed puts out with this information, you can actually see that there's been growth across all industries and across all occupations. Here are the top 5 highest paying median wage occupations in Southwest Minnesota. And you can see there's 1,100 jobs in healthcare practitioners and technical. And again, this is in 2021. There were 404 positions in business and financial operations, 307 in management, 70 in computer and mathematical, and 40 in legal. But we don't need more lawyers, right, Patrick? We have a board member here who's a lawyer. He knows. So a fundamental shift has taken place in economic development, where we're no longer super concerned about recruiting more jobs. And that's been the policy and the strategy since the 1970s, is how do we get more jobs in our region? And now we're talking about people recruitment. This is a whole different bag of policies and strategies that I think a lot of workforce and economic development organizations are slightly uncomfortable with, largely because we're dealing with things that they haven't always had to deal with. So now in workforce development and economic development, we're talking about resident recruitment and retention initiatives. We're going to be talking about high school engagement today. We're talking about increasing childcare because that's been a concern and a barrier to getting more employment in our areas. We're worried about having more housing for folks and also engaging people that may be retired early. We saw a lot of folks over the pandemic that were 55 and older leave the labor force. So what does engaging them look like? These are just totally different ways that we're uncomfortable with in dealing with our populations in economic development. We do have a whole series talking about this. If you are interested, you go on our website. We gave the data on job vacancies back in 2017. This is a pre-pandemic. This isn't just a pandemic issue. We've been dealing with this for a long time. We had one on resident recruitment. We had another one on high barriers to employment. So engaging populations that are perhaps in poverty or have a criminal background history, things like that, that tend to have high barriers to employment. As well as then engaging high school students, which was just kind of a quick overview of like, what are some of the barriers in engaging your high school students to talk about opportunities that are local. So now we're going to dive a bit deeper and look at the data. So bear with me as we kind of lay the foundation of how we got to some of our results and our messaging as we work through this. So we had a project initiation, and again, as Nora talked about, we were approached by the Office of Higher Education to kind of think about and take on this project, but we didn't do it alone. There was a whole group of us that got together in the early time, putting this project together, trying to figure out exactly what the research question was and what kinds of data we wanted to put together. We had Office of Higher Education, DEED, Minnesota Department of Education. We had the Southwest West Central Service Cooperative, Minnesota Valley Education District Consortium, and I think there were probably a few others on there too. But there are a whole bunch of us together trying to figure out how we're going to look at this data and make it worth our time and your time. So this is a research question we came up with. Among high school graduates, which educational experiences result in a higher probability of having local geographic workforce participation at time X? Time X, I'm going to just want to make sure we all understand we're not talking about years here. So time X isn't 2008, 2009. Time X is 1 year after graduating high school, 2 years after graduating high school, 3 years after graduating high school. So that's a little bit different, and I'll explain that a little bit more as we move forward, but just keep that in your mind. We're not talking about set time years. This is the population we used. We used every high school graduate between 2008 and 2019 with high schools that had a physical address of EDR 6E, 6W, and 8. So just so you all know, I'm going to be referring to this region as Southwest, this region, even though the planning region for Southwest would not include EDR 6E, which is Candy, Ohio County, Meeker. It actually include EDR 9E, EW. EDR 9W, that's right. So just keep that in mind. When I refer to Southwest, I'm not actually referring to the more authentic or the more Minnesota state recognized Southwest as a planning region, just so we know. And I took years 2006 through 2019. That's all the data that's in this. One thing really interesting about this is a population or a census data. This isn't a random sample. So this really makes it easy. So if anybody's wondering like, well, is this representative of the community? This is the community. Like there is no other representation better than what this is right here. So I wanted to give you just that time X again, just so we're all clear. As you can see, if we had student ID number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I had all these students, and let's say they graduated in 2009, then 1 year after graduation, or 2 years, let's say they graduated in 2008, right? Then 1 year after graduation is 2009, 2010, 2011, and then student 3, let's say they graduated in 2015, then 2016, 2017, 2018. You can see when I talk about 2 years after graduation, it actually represents different years, but it represents that group of folks that were at 2 years after graduation. And as you can see then too, as we get further out, there's going to be less and less people in my data set. That's why I can't say this many people are in my data set, because it depends on what time X I'm looking at. And this is what it looks like. So out of the entire data set, I had 38,154 individuals. And as we get further out for years after graduating high school, it gets to be less and less and less. But just so we're all clear, this is what it looks like, and this is what I'm talking about. So the statewide, or the SLEDs, I'm not going to try and do the tongue twister of statewide longitudinal education data systems every time. So I'm referring to SLEDs. That is this data, and that allows us to pull in information for each individual regarding their Minnesota employment records, their high school variables. This includes like what kind of courses they took, were they involved in PSEO, things like that, as well as, were they categorized as having a limited English proficiency, things like that. And then we also were able to pull in their post-secondary, I don't want to say records because it's not their records, but some of the variables regarding their post-secondary experience. So I'm going to be talking a lot about this, meaningful workforce participation. We are not talking about people that are participating just in the labor force. This was pretty important to, I felt like folks in Southwest that we talked to, that we try and get at what it means to have somebody that's working full-time in the region with a single employer. That doesn't mean anybody else isn't important and that isn't an important part of our labor force, but for this particular project, that's what we were going for. So we have meaningful workforce participation, which means that individual worked 1,000 plus hours worked with a single employer in a calendar year. That's what meaningful workforce participation means. So we were able to then, for each time X, so each year after graduating high school, we categorize each individual to figure out, did they have meaningful workforce participation in Southwest? So that EDR 8, 6W, and E. Did they have meaningful workforce participation in Minnesota, but not Southwest? So they were somewhere else in Minnesota. They could have been attending post-secondary. So we just kind of categorize them as, you know, they might have been working part-time. They're just attending post-secondary because again, that's not quite what we're looking for. Not meaningful, not post-secondary. That means they weren't attending post-secondary, but they also didn't meet that meaningful workforce participation definition. And then the last one, which is a very interesting one, which we'll talk about a little bit later on in the presentation, the individuals that didn't have a Minnesota employment record and weren't attending post-secondary. So now remember with this SLEDS data, we only have information regarding Minnesota employment records. And even that isn't the full scope of things. We'll talk about that in a second. But if they didn't have a Minnesota employment record and they weren't attending post-secondary, they kind of disappeared. And that means they could be working somewhere in another state. They could be working for the federal government. They could be in military service. There's a couple different things, or not participating in the labor force at all. And we've run some estimates on that, and we'll talk about it in a bit here. So this is just kind of looking at then the flow of where these Southwest Minnesota high school graduates went. This is the percent share of each time X into each of those 5, what I'm calling workforce participation states, right? And you can see right after students graduate high school, the year they graduate high school, well over 50% are attending post-secondary. And as we go, they kind of slide off and we get less and less of a percentage as they kind of get older and time moves forward after they graduate high school. And then you can see some of these other ones start to grow as that occurs, right? So you can see the meaningful workforce participation in Southwest does okay at first, or has good growth. And then by year 4 or 5, it kind of stabilizes right around 25%. I'll show another chart here in just a second. Meaningful workforce in Minnesota for these individuals starts out pretty slow. But then by that 4 to 5 years after graduating high school and as they're attending post-secondary drops, we see that increase in meaningful workforce in Minnesota. Not meaningful, meaning those part-time workers, this is just like a static 15%. And it doesn't matter what year after graduating high school, there always just seems to be about 50% of the participation or of the participants or the individuals that are just kind of working part-time and just didn't meet that meaningful workforce participation. And then the no Minnesota employment record. You can see it's actually pretty good size right off the bat, and it grows tremendously to about 30-some% of this data set by 9 to 10 years after graduating high school. So a better way, if we wanted to break this up and kind of take out the attending post-secondary and just look at these individually, you could see, again, meaningful workforce in Southwest, really nice growth, and then stabilizes around 25%. So this means in Southwest, of the Southwest Minnesota high school graduates, you guys, I don't want to say retain, but 25% by 5 years after graduating high school have meaningful workforce participation in this region. Another 25% has meaningful workforce participation outside of the region, but still in Minnesota. And then about 30% or another 25% don't have a Minnesota employment record and are not attending post-secondary. We don't quite know what happened to them, but we're going to try to estimate it a bit here in this presentation. So our next goal is we kind of know what these trends look like. Now we want to figure out, are there some factors that contribute to them being in either of these states? And that's what we did. So we looked at individual characteristics. We looked at community high school characteristics, such as the unemployment or wages in the high school county, trying to get an idea of maybe that's playing a role. Educational career, particularly in high school, CTE courses, ACT and other test scores, PSEO participant, and then post-secondary career, what institution type, the location of the college they went to and graduated from, the highest credential earned, and a few others as well. There were over 20 some variables that we started with in the data set. And we went through a process to first start out identifying which some of these variables are explaining the same thing. So for example, we had limited English proficiency as a variable and one that was needed, what's it called? English learners was another one. Well, they were kind of explaining the same percentage of whatever model I was using. So we just got rid of one of them. We just used the strongest one. And so we did that. We went through a process of identifying those similar variables. We then put it through kind of it's a classification regression tree analysis, which is just a regression model to try and identify which variables seem to always come up really as being impactful, as being important. And then we kind of just could use a little bit of professional instinct to be like, all right, these seem to be the ones, right? Because statistics, as much as people want to say, there's always a little bit of kind of guesswork in some of this stuff and kind of fly by your gut. But that's kind of how we got to largest impacts. And then we looked at those variables with the largest impacts, and we looked at what the differences then are within each of those. So, for example, if CTE courses, the number they took, or the achievement, so if they were a CTE concentrator versus a participant versus no CTE, what was the difference in which state they went into, what proportions? And that's all how we kind of handled it. So we identified these as being kind of the most, I would say, prominent as well as most consistent factors. And I'm just going to be the first one to admit there's a lot of nuance in this analysis, and there's a lot of ways and a lot of things that we could say. And this is only a small piece of a student's decision-making process of going anywhere, but at least this gives us some good clues as to kind of how things are playing out. First was the after high school path, whether they graduated or not, the location of the college they graduated from, the institution sector of that college, and their highest credential earned all popped up as consistently being really, really important in terms of where they had their highest, where they had most meaningful workforce participation. High school planning was number 2. So CTE achievement, total CTE courses, whether they took the ACT and MCA scores, both reading or all 3, reading, math, and science all came up as being significant. We're going to talk about that again in a little bit. And then there were some individual characteristics. Race and ethnicity came up, and the EDR from the high school that they graduated from. And they're going to start making a lot more sense when we start looking at this, and you'll be like, yeah, of course. Again, I want to say, I don't think any of this is groundbreaking. I think all of this stuff is what most of you probably already know and feel and have professional instincts towards. This hopefully just kind of provides a little bit of context as well as some proof and some evidence to kind of help you feel good about what's going on here in the region. As well as, I think, provide some numbers that will help you write some grants and get further support for some of the work happening here. So we did all this, and 2 of the key themes. So I'm going to go through all of these kind of takeaways that we got from the data, but you're going to notice 2, I think, main key themes that we constantly, Marnie and I, we go back and forth when we see this stuff, and we're like, all right, what are the themes? And we go back for a couple of weeks trying to figure it all out because there's a lot to handle here. But these are the 2. Local ties significantly increase the odds that an individual will have meaningful workforce participation in Southwest. And 2, there seems to be a disconnect in traditional educational paths and local careers. So that really is meaning, and you're going to see this in the data, that the students that maybe foresee themselves going for an advanced degree or doing something that's going to require a little bit more of an educational background tend to leave more. And that's kind of remnant of what we saw, and I hate using this phrase, the brain drain, thing, but that was back in the day when maybe we didn't have those career options in our region. Now we have those career options in the region, but yet these students still tend to go other places. Why? And that would be kind of a big question that I'm not going to answer, but I'm hoping maybe you guys can as a region. So, okay, let's start with takeaway number 1. Staying local is important to Southwest labor force needs. So we looked at the path taken after high school, and there are multiple paths, right? So we have folks that didn't attend college at all, some that attended some college, some that graduated from a 2-year, where they graduated in 2 years, some graduated from a 4-year, all this stuff. And this is kind of what we came up with. And this is just a quick summary. I'm going to show some charts too. So the folks that had meaningful workforce participation in Southwest, a higher proportion graduated from a college in Southwest, graduated from a 2-year college anywhere, and attained an associate degree or less credential. That doesn't mean they didn't graduate. They still graduated from a college, but it was a credential less than a 2-year. I didn't quite know how to say associate degree, for licensure, or certificate of some sort. Meaningful workforce participation in Minnesota typically meant that they graduated from a college outside Southwest, but in Minnesota, graduated from a 4-year college, and attained a bachelor's degree or higher. And then in Minnesota employment record, either 1, significant portion of them just don't attend college at all, or two graduating from a college out of state. There's definitely like those two are very prominent. So let's take a look at this in a little bit more detail. So this is looking at the proportion of students that have meaningful workforce participation in the Southwest, and I'm just using 5 years after high school. And I'm going to say this right off the bat, like no matter what time X we looked at, these trends were pretty solid. So it didn't matter if it was 7 years after high school graduation, 10 years. So we use 5 years as kind of like that nice middle point to kind of provide the message, I guess, of what we're seeing. So post-secondary location, let me walk you through this so you can get an idea of how we look at this. So what this is saying is that 43% of those high school graduates in Southwest, 43% of them had meaningful workforce participation if they came from a college in Southwest. That was huge. And since I'm on a 2-year campus, I will just say, if you split it up even more, and so it was a 2-year college in Southwest or a 4-year college in Southwest, the 2-year colleges in Southwest was almost 50%, which there's nothing that came even close in this analysis to 50%. That's really, really impressive. So kudos to the 2-year colleges in Southwest at keeping those students here, again, 50%, where the 4-year Southwest colleges was actually closer to, I think, 41 or 39%. So it dropped down, still higher than all the other types of college locations, but there was a difference there. But we put them together here. Highest credential earned, you can see almost 40% of those students that had an associate degree or less had meaningful workforce participation in Southwest. And 2-year, 42%. And that is 2-year anywhere. It didn't matter if it was in the region, outside the region, or another state, 42%. So let's look at meaningful workforce participation in Minnesota, not Southwest. So as you can see, 39% of the individuals that graduate from Minnesota college campus outside Southwest had meaningful workforce participation outside of Southwest, but in Minnesota. That makes sense, right? They went to Morris or Bemidji, or more than likely the Twin Cities or St. Cloud, or even Moorhead, right? They tend to kind of be in those regions after they graduate college. Bachelor degree or higher was quite a bit more at 34%. And then post-secondary type of 4-year, 34%. Again, kind of those two messages of they're not local and they seem to be going for more advanced degrees. They tend to not have meaningful workforce participation in this region. And then this is the no Minnesota employment record. And again, I'm going to explain these mysterious individuals in just a second here, so bear with me. But these folks, again, you can see the folks that didn't go to college, 37% of them had no Minnesota employment record 5 years after high school. And then the folks that graduated from a college out of state, 46%. And then here, if we did it by college type, it actually didn't matter. It was just the no college, which is kind of an interesting little wrinkle in all this. And I think that'll become clear when we start talking about BIPOC populations and how they, in particular, have a higher proportion of them that don't go to college. So takeaway number 2, not enough students attending local colleges. So we just gave kudos to the colleges in Southwest doing such a great job. The bad thing is that not a lot of Southwest high school graduates are attending these colleges. And that's really kind of the sticking point. And it's why we're not seeing as many of those students flow in. So percent by college grad. So this is just out of that 38,154. I just calculated, okay, how many of these graduated, and it was like 5 years after high school and beyond. How many of them graduated in a college that was located in Southwest, and it was only 12%, compared to 27% that just didn't attend college at all, 25% that had some college, 22% graduated out of college in Minnesota outside Southwest, and 14% out of state. And that's disheartening to see 14% that there's more graduating out of Minnesota than actually in the region. And I think it's one reason why there should be a little hope on the North Star Promise, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Maybe putting a dent in that, that'll be good. Percent by highest credential. Again, this wasn't as significant, but it's still interesting that associate degree or less was the lowest at 24.1%. And then as well, again here, percent by college type, you could see 18.7% for 2-year colleges. And these were the kind of post-high school paths that were most beneficial to or had the highest proportions of individuals that had meaningful workforce participation.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Did you look at what the percentage of college numbers are in Southwest versus the state? Like if we only have 12% of the graduates, do we only have 12% of the colleges?
Oh, I don't know. I'm trying to think why that would matter.
Well, if you only have 2 colleges in Southwest, it's pretty hard to have 50% of your people graduate.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's true, but we also have severe decline in enrollment in those colleges as well.
Right, but I'm just saying that probably plays into that a little bit because there's a much higher percentage of people going to college in the cities because of the number of colleges.
Yeah. But again, then you would hope that the proportion would be different, right? So yes, for this one, absolutely, you're right. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yep, that's a really good way to put it.
Yeah.
If anybody couldn't hear that online, the comment was that we have to also keep in mind that for folks, colleges in Minnesota outside Southwest, well, there's a lot more colleges there. So of course, a bigger proportion of our high school graduates are going to go to those colleges. Yeah, totally. Good point. Okay, takeaway number 3. Increasing the odds for regional workforce participation with career and technical education and local career awareness. And I'm really excited about the CTE work that's going on in this region and across the state. And we really do consider this to be a local tie, just by the way that it's defined. So Minnesota Department of Education has it defined as a sequence of courses that integrates core academic knowledge with technical and occupational knowledge and skills to provide students a pathway to post-secondary education and careers. And if you look at how they have it defined and what makes like a really solid CTE program, they have things in there like work-based learning. You have a lot of community and educational organizations involved that are local. Like everybody's kind of in on this, building the curriculum and the programming. And so we really do consider CTE to be like a proxy, a really solid proxy, and being kind of a driver of increasing awareness of local opportunities. So these are box plots. I don't really like box plots, but I'll kind of go through it here a little bit. All this is showing is that we have 1 year after high school grads, 5 years and 10 years, and we're just showing this red box is essentially folks that have meaningful workforce participation in Southwest. So these red boxes tend to have higher numbers of CTE courses in their background. That's all it's saying. They're a little bit higher than the other boxes, which is meaningful workforce in Minnesota and no Minnesota employment record. And this was statistically significant by a lot, actually. As was this. So then we broke it down not by number, but by CTE achievement. And as you can see, 34% of the individuals that got was a CTE concentrator or completer, depending on the year, because that definition changed since 2008. 34% of them had meaningful workforce participation in Southwest, which is significantly higher than the folks that didn't have any CTE, which was only 20%. And I think this really does confirm some of the research that OHE has done and Minnesota Department of Education on this stuff as well. So instead of showing you more charts with percentages, I just kind of wanted to like encapsulate some of the core themes that we saw. So not only impacting workforce participation states, but also CTE seem to impact their post-high school, after high school paths. Like what did they take after they graduated high school? And what we saw is higher CTE engagement generally meant higher percentage of folks that went in to get an associate degree or less, graduate from a 2-year college or graduate from a Southwest college by a significant amount, which all of those end up having high proportions of individuals with meaningful workforce participation. So essentially CTE is kind of leading students into paths that also have higher odds of having meaningful workforce participation in the region. So that's good. So not only is it impacting the end game, but it's kind of impacting that middle game as well. It also decreased the percentages of students that went to the ones that weren't super beneficial in terms of numbers in having meaningful workforce participation in Southwest, but rather in Minnesota or out of state. So higher CTE engagement typically meant lower proportions of individuals that got a bachelor's degree or higher, graduate from a 4-year college, graduate from another state, or just never attended college. And all of these led to lower proportion of individuals with meaningful workforce participation in Southwest, lower. So outside of Southwest, higher. Takeaway number 4, I think we got 7, so we only got a few more left. Planning for advanced degrees increases odds for having meaningful workforce participation outside Southwest. And this kind of gets at that second message that we just constantly saw come up in the data. So we didn't even use ACT scores. I just took if they took the ACT or not. I figure that's a good proxy is, are you planning on being in college or not? Like, that's a pretty good proxy. And you could see 29% of the individuals that took the ACT was significantly higher to have workforce participation outside still Southwest, but still in Minnesota. And then we did MCA scores. So M is math, R is reading, S is science, and this is 1 through 4. I hope I got that right? They give a score 1 through 4. All right. You could see if they had a higher score of 3 or 4, they're significantly more likely to have workforce participation in Minnesota outside of Southwest. So again, it's kind of that like these kids that are planning to go to college, have advanced degrees, or do something, whatever. I don't know how to explain it. More highly skilled. I don't know. They're all high skilled to me. I couldn't do most of the stuff that kids are doing, but anyways, those kids that were kind of doing that thing, they kind of left. And not only did it impact workforce participation states, but it also impacted, again, where they went after they graduated high school. So we had higher proportions. ACT takers and high MCA scores typically led to higher proportions that graduate from a college outside Southwest, including out of state, earn a bachelor degree, or graduate from a 4-year college. And again, all of these had higher proportions of individuals with meaningful workforce participation outside Southwest. Really hammering home those 2 key messages. I hope that it's coming through. And then takeaway number 5. So here we're going to fill in that mystery population, try and figure out what's going on with them. So border state competition, taking non-college grads and college grads. And it's interesting. And, you know, we don't have enough data to fill in all the gaps, but I think with you guys' professional instincts, you kind of know what's going on. So who are they? This is what we do know. They're not attending college. We know that because I have the post-secondary confirmations from every state in the United States. And we know they are not employed by a Minnesota employer because I have the Minnesota deed, however they collect who's employed and not employed. It's all anonymous. But what they could be working in another state. That could be possible. I don't have South Dakota or North Dakota's employment records, so I don't know. They could be working for the federal government, believe it or not. That's something that Dean can't track because the federal government's pretty particular about that. They could be full-time military, serving in the military. They could be self-employed. And so they're essentially in the labor force, but they're doing their own thing. Or they're just not participating in the labor force. And of course, they could have passed away as well. That is an option, but the bringing up of death during a presentation typically isn't something we all. So this is what the data said, and then we're going to kind of go into something a little bit more off the back of the envelope type estimates. So the proportion of individuals with no Minnesota employment records, typically they had lower CTE courses. So that on the left is again the number of CTE courses. This is 5 years after graduating high school. They're typically lower. And then you can see here by CTE achievement, if they had no CTE, 36% of them had no employment record, Minnesota employment record, which is really high compared to some of the other ones. And then also I wanted to show kind of how they looked like after they left high school. And you can see the students that had no college, quite high. 37% of them had no Minnesota employment record. Border states, not surprising, right? 45% of them had no Minnesota employment record, meaning they probably stayed in that state to work. Not all of them, but quite a few of them, as well as far, far away. Sorry, that's an inside joke with Marnie. She's a huge Star Wars fan. So we did some back of the envelope kind of calculations just to kind of see, all right, let's just see what that looks like, because I feel like everybody just wants to know how many. Just tell me, right? What are we losing? So 5 years after high school, if I were to take that group and I put them in the 5 different workforce participation states, they were either, workforce participation in Minnesota, not Southwest, and Southwest. And then I put ones that just had no Minnesota employment record. There was a little over 5,000 of those individuals 5 years after graduating high school. So then we can kind of look, okay, what's the average labor force participation rate in this entire region? Because I want to take out then an estimate of who's not just participating in the labor force. So we did that. And that was like 680 some. And then we looked up non-employer statistics can tell us each county what's the percentage of folks that have kind of a 1099 non-employer status. So we took those individuals out. And then we looked at the ACS data to figure out how many were in the military, and we took those out. And we ended up getting about 4,000. I'd say a little less than 4,000 of them are likely working in another state. We don't know if it's meaningful workforce participation or not, but we do know that it's about 4,000 from this region at 5 years after graduating high school that have gone to another state. And keep in mind, that's 5 years after high school. So the truer impact is probably more, but this is just that grouping right there. All right, takeaway number 6. This is where it gets interesting too, where you see geography starting to play a role and how the push and pull factors start to impact students. So I did here, just looking at those two workforce participation states. So if I did workforce participation in Southwest, almost every EDR was the same. There was no significant difference in how many of the individuals from those EDRs had meaningful workforce. It was about the same. But what you did see is when you looked at meaningful workforce participation in Minnesota, but outside of Southwest, or had no Minnesota employment record, you definitely start to see some significant differences. And this makes sense. Essentially, the EDRs that are closest to North Dakota, South Dakota, and the border states had a higher proportion of them with no Minnesota employment record. And EDR 6, which is closer to St. Cloud and the Twin Cities and some of the northern places, they had a significantly higher percentage of them that had meaningful workforce employment or participation in Minnesota, but outside of Southwest. That kind of makes sense, right? And again, if we were to actually follow their after high school paths, EDR 6E had a significantly higher percentage of students that went to college outside of Southwest, but in Minnesota, a significant amount. EDR 6W both had Minnesota and the border states, but not Southwest. They were low. And so was EDR 6E, had a lower percentage. And then EDR 8 actually had the highest, a significantly higher percentage of them that had graduated college in Southwest as well as border states. So you can kind of see how those pull factors work, right? And again, you know, there's a lot of reasons students are moving, and there's a lot of reasons that we're all competing against each other to make those trends happen. Okay, this is the last takeaway. This one's a little bit of a, I would say, needs a deeper dive. And I think some of your professional experience maybe will be able to answer these questions a little bit better. But it's looking at BIPOC populations having higher percentages with no Minnesota employment record, which also showed that they also were significantly less likely to graduate college. So here I did 1 year, 5 year, and 10 year after graduating high school, and you can see the BIPOC populations, about 32% of them had no Minnesota employment record, 33%, and then 41%. This wasn't as significant, but again, I think it's worth mentioning because this is such a significant population in Southwest Minnesota that it's important. And again, we can see this as no college, some college, or they actually graduate college. And I didn't split it up by 2 year, 4 year, or anything like that. I just kind of wanted to see what the difference was. And you can see significantly higher amounts of BIPOC population had no college, some college, but never graduated. And significantly higher or lower of BIPOC, 25% that graduated college. And I think that kind of plays a little bit of a role into why they also have a higher percentage of them that don't have a Minnesota employment record. I just don't know if they're really linked to anything local. So a key question, those are our 7 takeaways from all this. And there's so much more that we could talk about. And but we, like, again, we want to keep this message as simplified and clear as possible. But one key question is why leave if opportunities exist locally? And this is something I think about a lot. And I think a lot of folks at DEED are kind of thinking about a lot is why, you know, we have always expected our young people to leave the region. And for a long time in our history, particularly in rural regions, Minnesota better than a lot of other rural regions, but in Minnesota, it was because the careers might have been limited to a lot of our young people. And so they had to leave to find careers that maybe they were interested in. Today, that's not the case. And I think we're all trying to grapple with, okay, so why is it still occurring or is it still occurring? And there does seem to be a disconnect. So when we looked at meaningful workforce in Southwest, it always had a little bit more of a local tie. Career and technical education, you were graduating from college in Southwest, associate's degrees, they were just more grounded in the region, and you just see a lot more awareness among these students of their opportunities local. And I'm not saying that is the one-all be-all strategy. There are, again, a lot of ways in which people's perceptions of their opportunities are framed and formed. But again, this was important in the data. Whereas people that were either not going to college or college outside the region, you know, were taking the ACT, had higher MCA scores, they're getting their bachelor's degree, just had a little bit more, I don't know, like they wanted to further their education more, felt for whatever reason, they had to leave the region to do that. And so there's kind of a disconnect between all of that. When we did the academic literature, there is a lot, and I just kind of wanted to end with this too, just to say that this data is a fraction of the variables that are impacting our students and how they're making their decisions today. So just to be very clear, that this is just a small sliver, because there are a lot of things. Perceptions of opportunities. This is just kind of a breakdown of the academic literature talking about how students form their perceptions of where they should go after they graduate high school. Youth satisfaction with current community and importance of future community characteristics, influence of school, family, and friends, aspirations and attributes of the individual youth. And this is why I always say, you know, when we first started looking at this back in 2017, I think I was interviewing Carrie or maybe somebody from your staff, and they're like, yeah, we're doing quite a bit. You know, we got the regional job fairs going, and absolutely, that is a big deal, but it's only a part, right? Like it's one thing. And I always say, I bet those students were really excited for 24 hours until they talk to their parents or their advisor or their friends. And all of a sudden their perceptions were changed again, right? Like you kind of have to stay in it, and it has to be, I call it like a full court press on these students just to make sure they still don't have to, they can make a decision not to come here or not to stay here, but at least they know, right? So with that, we have some recommendations. And again, we're Center for Rural Policy and Development. We typically make recommendations to policymakers and leaders. So this isn't necessarily recommendations for the folks on the ground, because you guys are already doing your thing and you know more than we do on this stuff. This is just more raising awareness with the policymakers and the folks that do the resource management and education on, you know, what we think is a good idea. Oh, that one did show up. You know what? We're going to skip that one. Well, okay. This was a little confusing that it didn't show up here. Part of it got scrambled, but essentially what we're saying, so we showed, keep an eye, I talked a lot about percentages and I'm talking a lot about odds. What's going to increase our odds? But if you look at the numbers, for example, let's look at the folks that take no, or let's actually look at if you graduate from a college in Southwest Minnesota, 5 years after graduating high school, there was 2,221 individuals that graduated from college in Southwest Minnesota. 960 of them, and there would have been a nice little line here that goes up here, ended up having meaningful workforce in Southwest. 960, that 40-some% that I talked about in one of those first charts, right? That's great, good high proportion. But you'll see 1,300 is way more, and that came from folks that didn't graduate college but had some college. They had a higher number. But again, that 1,300 or 4,500 is a much smaller proportion. And so essentially, if we had a whole bunch of students going to some college, we're going to lose a lot more students. We're trying to increase our odds. We're trying to put them, not want to say put them in pathways, but increase our odds so that students that graduate high school here will end up having meaningful workforce participation here. And so that's important. So don't always look at the numbers. It might be proportions, might be indicators of your greatest strategies. Invest in local programs that raise awareness of local careers. So CTE, continue to do work. I would always get a little jealous when I was going through high school. It was the big kind of everybody needs to get a 4-year college. You're all going into STEM. You're all going to be doctors or lawyers or computers. Computer was a big thing when I was in high school in the 90s. And our only CTE course, I don't even know if they call it CTE, was shop and home economics, right? That was really during the time where they kind of, I want to say kind of got rid of investments in that type of programming in our high schools, or at least didn't prioritize it. That's really flipped over the past decade, I would say. And a lot of cool stuff's happening in high schools, a lot of opportunities for students, and can't say enough that continued investment in that is a great idea. And I know so many people at Minnesota Department of Education, OHE, that are just, they're into this stuff. Organizations that support CTE program, this goes back to our report from before, that it might be that funding CTE may need to be more about funding organizations that help high schools and community colleges develop CTE. We heard from a lot of high schools that said, we would love to have more CTE, but we don't have the technical expertise, we don't have the resources and the time to do it. And this is where organizations such as LYFT really comes in nice, where they kind of take that stuff on and help those partnerships develop so that the schools can really focus on developing the curriculum and teaching the students, and not so much trying to develop all the outside stuff. So keep that in mind. The CEO program, so creating entrepreneurial opportunities program, if anybody's heard that, look it up. It's a great program. Internships, regional job fairs, all kinds of stuff, whatever's going to raise awareness of local careers. That needs to be done, because again, we are living in a moment where there are careers to be had in our rural regions, which wasn't always the case. Tweak existing programs to compete with Build Dakota, and this is kind of talking about the North Star Promise program that was passed during the last legislative session. I think a lot of folks are pretty excited about it. One thing that I get excited about is, you know, if we were to look at the percent of Southwest high schoolers that graduate college by campus location, 20% of them are out of South Dakota. You know, 28%, 28% are out of either South Dakota, North Dakota, or Iowa. If we could put a dent in that and keep more of those students from going to those states and staying at least in Minnesota, if not the region, I think would be a huge win. And so I feel like that is a really, really good thing. And that's why we put potential to keep more students local. Potential tweaks. The one thing that Build Dakota has going forward is one that I think is really powerful is it allows for local sponsors. So businesses, employers, community foundations, EDAs, they have all gotten involved in South Dakota Build Dakota program to like sponsor a student, like, hey, this student, we know this kid, he wants to do this work here, we'll pay for it. Like, we'll get this person through. And that just allows one, that local connection, which I think is really powerful, but as well as, you know, kind of alleviates the state from being 100% providing the resources to make this happen. So I just find that to be a really cool thing. And then, and this might be, I don't want to say, maybe some people maybe disagree with this, but I really feel like we need to build in a state employment requirement to it. That if a student is going to come here and get that scholarship, that they can't, there's a real fear that they will go to South Dakota to work right after they graduate college. If you're in Moorhead, there's very little stopping that college graduate from going to Fargo to work, right? And that's, I think it's a little bit of a missed opportunity and something that I think we could tweak. As a legislator, I hope that you would consider that be an important piece. Hey, you have to stay in Minnesota or work for an employer in Minnesota for so many years. That's something Build Dakota does. And they actually do it that has only with 2-year colleges. Again, something to consider. Yeah.
So another thing with the Build Dakota with the local sponsorship, it allowed the colleges to practically double the amount of sponsorships.
Oh, really? So essentially, the individual is saying here for the folks online, by allowing local sponsors, the 2-year colleges themselves were allowed to double the amount of sponsors they had.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because Build Dakota gave you X amount of money, and then if you double that for sponsorship, your number of sponsorships double.
Double, yeah. And great for enrollment too, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing, I'll throw this out there, they don't have a state requirement of where you're living from. Again, that's very, it's crazy that they're South Dakota is doing that, but yeah, it's very interesting. And number 4, invest in resident recruitment and retention programs. You'll notice this postcard, how many of you have received this? Few of you, yeah. See about 5 hands raised here. I'm sure many of you online have seen this. South Dakota is doing a very clever, and I would say a pretty sophisticated marketing campaign to individuals, particularly in southern Minnesota. I don't know where they're getting the mailing list from, but they're sending out these postcards. Ready to move to the land of the free, it says. 25,000 plus jobs, which I think is funny because the Southwest region itself has more than 15,000 jobs available, just this region. 77,000 starting salary, 0% income tax, right? Like they're putting a full court press on getting more people to live and work in South Dakota. So competition is on, and I think the state of Minnesota in general, if we could develop some more programs and resources to invest in resident recruitment and retention programs that really just, one, highlight what it's like to live here and some of the great opportunities that we have here. So with that, we're gonna have some local initiatives. I pause, we're gonna have some questions. I want these two to be able to come up and talk about a lot of the really interesting stuff that's going on in Southwest. I think it's worth mentioning that the data I was looking at, when we get to 5 to 10 years after graduating high school, that's relatively recently for a lot of those folks. And so I wouldn't say that this data encapsulates any changes happening from the programs that have been kind of occurring over the last 4 to 5 years. We're going to start seeing that impact as we continue to move forward. We just need more time to assess that. And so I wanted to give that time. Who wanted to go first, Carrie or Eriann? Okay. I'm going to pull up her presentation here real quick. Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you.
You might have to click on it to get it to move forward.
All right,
Yeah.
awesome, thank you. So as Kelly mentioned, my name is Eriann Faris. I'm the Career and Tech Ed Project Coordinator with the Southwest West Central Service Co-op. And my primary role with the Service Co-op is to oversee the LYFT or Launch Your Future Today Career Pathways. And at LYFT, we believe that potential is limitless when everyone knows their strengths. So through alignment of industry and education, we are creating relevant and engaging experiences and opportunities for students. So LYFT Career Pathways was created in 2017. And it is an initiative that has been developed to rebuild and strengthen career and tech ed in Southwest West Central Minnesota. So here is sort of our formula of success and what we believe has really been a reason why a lot of these, why we've been seeing so many impacts. When LYFT initially started, in order to access innovation grant dollars, we had to have more than one school district. So we were trying to get school districts to share resources, but there also had to be an industry partner. Now, 5 years later, we've taken away the school district, the 2 school district thing, but the key component is that they are aligning their content and their curriculum with industry. And not just industry signing a piece of paper that says, yeah, we'll participate, and then there's really no connections, but literally helping them with content, co-teaching. We just have amazing models. And so the way that we're doing that is through this. So really that business is driving and supporting these programs, that our school districts, our workforce boards, all of our community leaders, our higher education, that they're being innovative and collaborative to ensure that the students have access to these areas that the business is driving. And so the way that we do this is through our innovation grants that I mentioned. And so we have the LYFT innovation grants. And the innovation grants, again, it has to be one high school cooperating with at least one business or industry. We want it to be where they are doing a development of new CTE courses, programs, or experiences. So this could be during the weekends, after school hours. It doesn't necessarily have to fit in the schedule of a classroom, which we realize is difficult as well when we talk about expanding and rebuilding career and tech ed in schools. It also has to match the local labor market needs. Collaboration with business partners for the program content. We want to really see hands-on learning opportunities and ensuring that they're sustainable, that it's sustainable after the first year. And so through the innovation grants, we've seen remarkable projects happen. For example, we have with the Montevideo High School, they're currently working with J&D Construction, where J&D Construction brings down employees into the classroom and teaches the students. They provide materials, and the teacher and the industry are really working alongside one another. Many of our school districts, such as Wabasso High School, Montevideo as well, they're working on diesel mechanics with Kibble equipment. Kibble equipment's been phenomenal in opening up their space and allowing students to come down during class time, to be oriented into their service shops and start understanding kind of those entry level pieces of what they need to know to become a diesel mechanic. I know we have 2 students from Wabasso High School who are now going to get educated and coming back to work for Kibble equipment in Wabasso afterwards. We have renewed memories out of Yellow Medicine East, and they are still one school district that does share resources with another school. So they cooperate with Renville County West. And those school districts, the last few years have been doing some phenomenal communications and marketing type projects. This last one that they just did, they paired up with Pioneer Public TV and some of the local nursing homes and worked with the senior citizens there to bring up their old paper photograph memories, get them digital and try to make their memories kind of on this digital platform. A lot of cool cross-generational conversations happening as well. But we learned that over the last couple of years, we've had 3 to 4 individuals from Yellow Medicine East and RCW go and now work for Pioneer Public TV. So just some really great things. I think a lot of these I share today because really resonates, I think, to the data that Kelly shared as far as those local ties and connections and how important they are. And that awareness component, not just the students, but the parents don't always understand what the opportunities are that are available. So the goal of LYFT is really that every student across the region gain the marketable skills through meaningful CTE courses or opportunities, experiences that really lead to further education and careers that match our labor market's needs. In one piece, that I just want to talk about here is we have been pushing this narrative since the beginning of LYFT. And it's really that idea that we need to start thinking differently. I know many of us, and hopefully it's getting better, but we'll go to a high school graduation and the first thing you ask your college or your high school student that you see is, what college are you going to? What college are you going to? So we've set a precedence there too, that if you're not going to college, you might be less than somebody who's going to college. And so really helping our students see that that is an ancient way of planning for careers. And I think it goes to that disconnect of the traditional paths, because the way we plan for careers is not how Kelly and I would have planned for our career. And I would say somehow I just happened to land in a job I love, but I don't know that I did anything, you know, spectacular to get here. I certainly didn't wake up one day I was 8 years old and say, I'm gonna run LYFT Career Pathways someday. You know, it was a series of decisions that I made, but I made those decisions based on the connections that I had. And I really find too, just talking with young people, and I know it was up there as well. But if they feel a connection, they're more likely to come back. Most kids want to leave because they don't feel like anybody cares at home about them. But here, we're really trying to get people to think, rather than college, major, my career pathway, what is my career pathway? What does that career path look like? And it's really helping the students then understand what are their talents, what are their skills, what are their abilities, and how do they navigate those skills? How do they attain those skills? How do they navigate them and apply them to the jobs that exist here in Southwest Central Minnesota? And so we really want it to be, again, that career pathway. Then you decide, what is that major? And from there you determine then, is it college? Is it work? Is it the other? And so really trying to push that. And lastly, just some other pieces that we've really been working to try and kind of continue this momentum. And I love this data because it's really showing that these strategies are working, of this awareness. But again, what's next after high school? So LYFT's created the 3 E's roadmap. The 3 E's are experience, exposure, and exploration. And it's a series of different ways to kind of work through your career path, but all packaged together on our website of just, again, those local ties of local resources. So these resources have been vetted through the LYFT Career Pathways Advisory Committee, who's encompassed of a very broad, diverse representation, several of them that I'm looking at here today, but have said that these are the resources that are good. And like, for example, one of them is a careers video. It's a careers on virtual career conversations that were created by the Southwest Minnesota Private Industry Council, but they're career conversations of local employers. There's some great career videos out there, but I don't necessarily want my student reading or learning about a manufacturer in Texas. I want them to learn about Action Manufacturing in Marshall, Minnesota. That's just as fabulous as a manufacturer that you find in Dallas, Texas. So I think it's just a lot of that and really doing that. The other piece too, with career and tech ed in our school districts, is it does cost a lot of money. Job vacancies, so finding people to teach and that have the appropriate licensure. Unfortunately, in order to have, you got to have your programs approved, and you got to have your teachers have to have certain licensure. And in order for that to happen, if you can get it all together, your school districts can receive revenues and levy those dollars. But it's not always easy. And so another piece of what LYFT really does is helps our educators, our schools. We've teamed up through the Minnesota Service Co-ops, Rural Career and Tech Ed Consortium, to work with Lakes Country. They're a service cooperative up north. They've teamed up with Pellsby to be able to help all of our teachers in our region who are on OFPs and not necessarily able to have their programs approved because of those pieces, really help them to be able to gain the appropriate licensure that they and their school districts need to operate these career and tech ed courses. And I think one thing that's interesting too, that we've talked a lot here with LYFT, is that when we talk about what projects have gone away or faded away, it hasn't ever been because we don't have enough money or because we don't have the interest. It's because that person left, that person retired. The individual with that passion and that enthusiasm to really to do these pieces. So we need to make sure that we have programs in place as well that not only support our employers and our students, but also our schools and the educators to ensure that they have the foundation that they need to be able to offer these pieces as well. So I had like 1,800 other things I was probably going to talk about, but I'm going to wrap it up because I know that we're kind of running out of time. But it has been phenomenal having LYFT Career Pathways and then seeing this data here today too. I'm really excited to see how things will kind of continue to further in the region. And I would just say our website is LYFTpathways.org. Definitely check it out. There's a link at the top that says projects. And you can check out all the projects that have been funded. Over 80 projects, over 20,000 students have been impacted since 2017. So lots of great work done by the LYFT Career Pathways Advisory Committee. So, thank you.
Thanks, Eriann.
Yeah, Carrie?
Sure.
Good afternoon, I'm Carrie Bendix. I am the Executive Director of the Southwest Minnesota Private Industry Council and the Workforce Development Board for Southwest Minnesota. I'm thrilled about the research. I just am very grateful for everyone who's involved in that. Back in 2017, 2018, we did a real thorough asset mapping gap analysis for workforce programs in needs in Southwest Minnesota. And we really found at that time that there is a shortage, or was a shortage, I think there still is a shortage of career counselors within our schools, particularly within our rural schools. The American School Counselor Association recommends 250 students to every one school counselor within our high schools. In Minnesota, according to their latest data, it was more like 570 students to one in Minnesota compared to the recommendation of 250 students to one. That is the fourth worst ratio in the country. So there's really was and is a need for our students to be able to do career exploration and understand what they're good at, what their interests are, and how it relates to the jobs here, or in Minnesota, or is particularly in Southwest Minnesota. So we started at that time, 2017, 2018, beginning to provide services to the school districts. We're calling our program the Youth Career Connections or Youth Career Connectors, and they go into the school districts and they help the school districts with what that school district's needs are. So we have the ability to provide career assessments to the students in interpreting those career assessments. We provide employability skills. We hear from employers, our students need to know what's kind of expected in the workplace. So we have a curriculum that we use called Bring Your A Game. And the A stands for, there's 7 different A's like attendance, attitude, appearance. I'm not gonna be able to name all 7 of them, but we have a great curriculum for that. We share current labor market information. Students really don't know the jobs that are here. They have a perception, even like when you go and you talk about healthcare, they're thinking of maybe like a handful of jobs in healthcare. Teachers, doctors, nurses, or not teachers, but doctors, nurses, in maybe the front desk, maybe the lab, but they don't really have a full understanding of the vastness of the different occupations that are within healthcare or within manufacturing. When you talk to students about manufacturing, they don't understand there's really clean manufacturing environments. They don't understand the technology now that's available and the engineering and all of the maintenance work that's a part of having a good manufacturing location. So the Youth Career Connectors also plan career fairs. This last year, we started to do summer career fairs or spring career fairs for summer jobs. highlighting and giving employers the opportunity to really highlight the opportunities they have within their particular businesses. We've done job shadows in Westbrook, Walnut Grove. Our Youth Career Connector has set up a job shadow for every high school student. And there's some fun stories that have come from that, where students are like, no, I don't want to go there. I'm not interested in that company, but they end up going and they're like, holy cow, that was amazing. And then they want to work there. So we have some amazing employers here in Southwest Minnesota, but they don't necessarily know that these jobs exist. So the Youth Career Connectors are really about connecting the students to the local employers, and they can do that through business tours, through business speakers coming into the classroom, through providing hands-on kind of experiences. And we do this in partnership. And so those are some of the activities that we have been doing as part of this. We received some state funding from the Department of Employment and Economic Development that started this work, and it was the Rural Career Counseling Coordinator funding. It's essential for our area. We also receive a little bit of money through the Minnesota Youth Program called Outreach to Schools, but it was not nearly enough to meet the need. So we have been reaching out to foundations and others to really help support this work. And we really feel that that connection between the students and the school districts and the employers are very, very helpful. LYFT is an amazing partner of ours as well. And we're supporting the career and technical education programs that are happening by promoting internships and apprenticeship opportunities for the students. So this particular study is really important because as a workforce development board, the strategy to connect our students with local employers has been our #1 strategy to address workforce development issues. And the study has now confirmed, yes, that's the direction that we need to go in. And so to be able to do more of this would be even a greater advantage. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you. So thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Well, that's about it. We did have a few comments online. Actually, one I wanted to show, this was from Amanda. Hold on one second, see if I can find it. But I don't know if any of you saw this. I'm going to share it. Amanda O'Connell shared this news article, which I didn't know about. And I don't know, Nora, have you seen this yet?
This is brand new, yeah.
Yeah,
They
brand new,
quite
so.
upset with the North Star Promise
Yep.
because years ago when my daughter was at NDSU, 45% of their enrollment came from the Twin Cities.
Yeah.
So
Yep, so
they know where their bread is buttered.
yep, so North Dakota has now put their eggs in the basket in terms of competing for our students. And again, this isn't, this isn't about trying to keep students or squashing their dreams as Nora, as you talked about, we really do want students to also to believe in their own dreams. And if that takes them out of the region, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think it's, trying to find those students that wasn't necessary. And so we're all in on this. I imagine Iowa is going to come out soon with something similar as well.
Right, but that isn't even statewide.
That's just NDSU.
NDSU.
Yeah.
So does the North Star Promise, are out-of-state students eligible for those funds?
No.
See, that's a problem with Minnesota.
What's that? I'm sorry, repeat that?
So if you live out of state,
Right,
you're not eligible for North State funds,
correct,
right?
North Star Promise, yeah.
You go to South Dakota, you go to Iowa, you don't have to live there
Right.
to get those funds.
Correct,
And so if the data shows that these students stay where they go to college,
yeah,
it would be in our best interest to offer those to students. Like, we're so close to the border. I mean, we're
Yeah.
8 miles from Iowa,
Yeah.
right? We're 45 minutes from South Dakota.
Yeah.
But none of those students from Iowa can get a workforce development scholarship.
Right.
Because they live in Iowa.
yeah, so the North Star is exactly right. So the North Star Promise is about keeping our residents. It has nothing to do with recruiting new residents or new
Right,
students, correct?
but if you're trying to fill that workforce gap.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
you want them to stay there, I mean, I just think there's. If other states are already doing that, I mean,
Yeah.
my son, where he graduated from, they had 45 students in the graduating class. About 23 of them were male, and I think out of that 23, 18 of them went into technical degrees. Well, I know that at least 9 of them went to South Dakota and got to go to school for free.
Yep. And yep, that's absolutely right. The data was quite clear that if they end up leaving the state, you saw about 50% of them ended up having no Minnesota employment record 5 to 10 years outside of after high school, which we can probably indicate most of them are working wherever they went to college. And again, it's worth mentioning too, that trend is absolutely true. After about 10 to 15, 12 years, it is worth mentioning too, that we do start to see around the time that people start turning 30, another in-migration of folks that used to be rural coming back into this area. So I want to make sure that we're not talking about those students are gone forever, because we do see this kind of, as they have kids, get married, get a little bit older, that kind of circle back into rural regions. So that's a real thing as well. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right talking about North Star Promise and the difference is
I mean, if you're talking about what is the message to policymakers,
yeah,
that would be my message to them.
Yeah.
If you wanna compare apples to apples, then you have to have programs that match up.
correct. Yep. Is there any other questions? It looks like,
There's a data question
okay.
from Aaron.
Okay, so the one question with the sleds, when categorizing the students' meaningful work, et cetera, what did you do with the students who were simultaneously in post-secondary and had meaningful work? Excellent question. They were categorized as post-secondary. And again, I'll fully admit that all of these categories were not clean, because there are quite a few that are attending post-secondary and working part-time or even working full-time, right? That's a real thing. But we kind of had to draw the line, the knife somewhere, and that's where the knife fell. And so, yep, that's a key thing. I did put in a footnote in the report mentioning that, and I did put in there that we did do a little bit of analysis just to make sure that we weren't missing like a huge chunk of these individuals, and it wasn't a ton. It wasn't very many that were going to impact the numbers. Second question on there was, I believe meaningful work was limited to those working 1,000 plus for a single employer. What if they had additional hours with a second employer? For example, teachers who work a second job during the summer. Excellent question. So I do know that teachers all would qualify. Oh, that's good. Okay, so yeah, so they would have the spring and the fall. That would make 1,000 plus hours. So they would be considered meaningful workforce employment, even if they did have that second job. But for example, let's say it was an adjunct faculty member at a college that's teaching one course part-time and then working part-time somewhere else to fulfill, they might not have been categorized as having meaningful workforce participation. And again, that's just kind of where the knife falls on some of that stuff. And we could cut this multiple different ways, and we're always going to miss out on some folks. So yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking.
And Kelly, when and where is your report going to be available for people?
Yeah, so that you mentioned that.
And...
Yeah, I got a couple of things. So the report's online. It's on our website currently, ruralmn.org. Check it out. You will find online the online report, as well as being able to download a printable version, as well as a one-page summary. This is being recorded, and we will put this, upload this onto our website on our YouTube channel. Appreciate if folks could send it around to you think might be interested in this kind of work. And one other thing I didn't bring up, and I forgot to bring that slide up, is that we know there's probably one, we could go deeper into this data, and two, there are other regions that might be really interested in their trends. Please come and talk to us. We're interested in talking about that. We would like to go deeper into some of this stuff and expand out to other regions. Absolutely would love to do it. So just contact somebody at Center for Rural Policy and Development, and we'll start talking about that. With that, I think that's that. Thanks, everybody. Really. Oh, we got one question in the back. I apologize. Go ahead.
I have one over here. No, I'll point at you.
Oh, yes, sir.
Well, since we have two, at least I know, college administrators here.
Yeah.
I know that our school board.
Your high school, your
Yes.
public school board?
Yes. Has a problem, a slight problem, with the tuition they have to pay for PSEO.
Oh, sure. Mm-hmm.
Is there any, I have said this a number of years. Why does high school, secondary have to be in two different silos?
Right, right.
We're siloed,
Yeah, yep. And what was interesting,
and we need to have fluidity between them.
yeah,
And PSEO having to pay the tuition
yeah,
doesn't help with the fluidity at the high school because
they have to pay for it.
$30.
Yeah, exactly.
And I know they need the money too,
Yeah,
but it's a legislature issue probably.
Yeah.
But even without them doing anything, can we increase that fluidity, that collaboration somehow?
Yeah.
So that the college infrastructure could come to the high school.
Yep.
Once in a while.
yep, and I think, so for those folks that maybe couldn't hear online, the question is this connection with PSEO and who pays for that, and you know, dropping some of these barriers where high schools can freely offer PSEO without having to worry about budget constraints, as well as post-secondary being able to offer these services to high school students without having to make money off of it or to have their bottom line be a part of this. How do we bring this all together and make it more fluid? It's a great question, and I think it's a great thing for the legislature to take a look at. I will say, and we didn't include it in the report or in our slide, students that took PSEO were significantly more likely to go to a four-year college or somewhere out of state. And I don't know if I'm right, but I do feel that there are plenty of school districts here that offer PSEO, but through colleges that aren't in Minnesota. Is that correct? I hear there's quite a few high schools that have PSEO offerings with FBSU and a few others. I don't know if that's true or not, but anyways, talk about another great connection, another local tie that would be important to informing our students about local opportunities and careers in the region as well. Absolutely. So something I think that needs to be considered. Okay, well, thanks, everybody. Appreciate you being here, and you'll hear more from us in the future, I'm sure.